Dear listeners, in this video I would like to talk to you about a very controversial topic. Can we negotiate our life with God? Although it may seem like a strange question, you should know that we find several places in the Bible where we see that we can negotiate our life with God. And I will give you an example so you can see that even today, it is still possible to negotiate your life with God. So not just in the past, not just in the Old Testament, even today you can negotiate your life with God. What I'm about to tell you is a true story, one that I lived through myself. So I was part of this story. To the event in two brothers' lives, I can tell you that one of the brothers was named Vasile and the other Ioan Vasile. He was an 18-year-old boy, a young man, and he had a brother, Ioan, who was about 25 years old. And during his life, Vasile was very sick, so he ended up being very ill. So he had a perforated appendicitis. For those of you who know, he was so sick that he was just a few days away from dying because of the critical situation he was in. Ioan's brother came to my mother because my mother was, as I told you in other videos, she was a prophetess, for those of you who don't know. And he came to our house and we prayed for his life, brother of a Vasile. My mother called all of us young people. We are several siblings. We are 13 siblings, and my mother called all of us. And she said, we need to pray for these brothers, for Vasile, and Ioan was with us. He was very upset because Vasile's brother was very sick and was close to dying. And we all got together and prayed for Vasile's brother so that he wouldn't die. And while we were praying, my mother had a prophecy, for those of you who know, a prophecy from God, in which God said this: he will not die. Vasile, I will prolong Vasile's life, but Ioan, you need to change your life and stop sinning. In fact, what happened? They were both brothers. They were from a Christian family, and they knew what was right and what was wrong. But his brother, Ioan, was making mistakes. So he was going after loose women and he was involved with sinful videos. So he was a very well-known man in the city, even to the police. Many of the judges were friends with Ioan, and Ioan would show them, he would give them a lot of sexually explicit material. And he also drew Vasile's brother into this practice. And now Ioan was very troubled in his conscience for what he had done to Vasile, and he prayed to the Lord, Lord, don't take Vasile, because I led him into bad things. He wasn't a bad child, but I led my brother into bad things. And God listened and said something like this: I will prolong Vasile's life. He will not die. But you, Ioan, must return to me and sin no more. If you sin again, you will die. You will die, Ioan. And he made great commitments. I heard them myself personally, and he said, I will not sin anymore. I will not do things that are not pleasing to the Lord anymore. I will return to God, and I will not sin anymore. But what happened next is something very, very interesting. I was at church on a Sunday at church, and the prayer time was just starting, the prayer time, and we were all praying. And suddenly I felt such a restlessness in my heart, and I kept feeling, go to the city center. I said, Lord, how can I leave the church when it's so crowded? Once you entered the church, leaving was difficult. How could I leave the church and go to the city center when the church service had just started? And I struggled a bit with this thought, and after a certain period of time, I gave into it and went to the city center, and I went to the city center. So I left the church, and when I got to the city center, I saw Vasile sitting on a bench, And I said, "What are you doing? Why aren't you coming to church? You know God asked you to come to church. You promised, and your brother was healed." Ioan asked, "How can I come to church? You know that I'm drunk." And I said, "It doesn't matter that you drank. Come to church. Come on now. Come with me to church." He said, "Oh, but I can't come to church. You know where I came from." But I asked, "Where did you come from?" "Well," he said, "I just came from an easy woman, so I was with a woman." Actually, what can I tell you, that Vasile was married and that was his wife, but through other bad things. He also went to an easy woman. He had just left an easy woman. And I said, "Hey, don't you remember the promise you made to God that you wouldn't go to an easy woman anymore and that you would repent?" And he said, hey, yeah, I know. Let me describe a few things about Ioan. He was a very, about Ioan. He was a very good man, very good. So if someone asked him for something, he would give with all his heart. He was a very good person, so he did a lot of good. But among other things, he also went to easy women, he sinned, and he lent out tapes with sexual movies. And because of that, he was very well known in the city by a lot of people. He was friends with everyone. So he was a good man. But sin is sin. Going to easy women, committing adultery is a sin that does not please the Lord. And the Lord warned him to turn away from this sin. And he couldn't. He just couldn't. So when I met him in the city, I told him, "Hey, don't you remember the promises you made to the Lord? Leave those things behind. Come on, turn back to the Lord. Why sin and risk something worse? God said you'd die if you don't return to him, since you promised him." So now what I want to tell you is that God accepts the challenge of man, or our challenge. And he listened to the voice of his brother. So Ioan, God listened to Ioan and gave back life to Vasile. So Vasile, during the time when he had a perforated appendix, his intestines were blocked and his whole abdomen was hard. So his intestines were blocked. And now the doctor told him he only had a few days to live, and God performed this great miracle. So the prophecies came through my mother, and that's exactly how it happened. A few days later, Vasile was healed, so God gave him life, but Ioan didn't keep his promise. He kept on sinning. When I met them downtown, he had just been with a loose woman and sinned. I told him, "Stop sinning, or what happened before could happen again. Come to church next Sunday. Don't skip anymore. Give up the bad things, because God doesn't like what you're doing, because God said so. If you don't turn to him, if you don't change your life and you keep on sinning, you will die. You're only 25. Don't die young. Turn to God." And now I don't know what happened. I only know that he didn't come to church. About a month went by and he still didn't come to church, because I was at church every Sunday and he didn't come. He didn't change his ways even after a month. Ioan had a car accident in the city. He was driving very fast and crashed under a truck and died. So Ioan died in a truck accident. He was in a small car, and at an intersection, he drove the car under a truck, and that's where he met his end. So what I want to tell you is that God accepts the challenge, but we also have to do our part. If God promised us something, we have to do that thing. We have to act. God gave Vasile his life, but with a condition, he said. "If you, Ioan, return to me, you will be safe unless you don't return to me, in which case you'll die." And that's what happened. Vasile lived on and is still alive today as I'm making this video for you. But Ioan ended his life, even though he was a good man. Now this challenge is also for those who, and there are many, speak against the work of the Holy Spirit and against prophecies. So there are still true prophecies today, and there are still true prophets today. And look, I brought you a solid argument that God speaks even through prophecy, and what he speaks comes to pass. Now we have to do our part, because there was a very clear condition here, that if you, Ioan, turn back to me and no longer sin, you will continue to live. But if not, I will bring you down to the dust of the earth so you will die. And that's what happened. He died. This story has a tragic ending. But I say that if we as people keep our promise to God, not all experiences have a tragic ending. So it can't always be that way. If we listen to God, we won't finish our race on this earth before our time. We won't finish the race, so we will be able to live on and enjoy life. So to answer the question, can we negotiate our life with God? The answer is yes, yes, we can negotiate our life with God. We can ask God for great things, things that are hard to believe could ever happen. Look, we can negotiate our life with God. A God who is so majestic and so great, we can go before him and negotiate our life. If we are in suffering, in illness, we can make vows before God again and again, and if God says yes, his yes is yes. I could tell you many things about myself personally. A year ago, around this time, I was extremely ill. And maybe I'm even making a video about this story. And look at me again. I'm walking around, going on trips, making videos. God gave me my health. God gave me my health. And I negotiated my life with God. And I could tell you about it, but not in this video. Can we each negotiate our lives now? The question is how? Because God doesn't speak to me directly. Even though you can hear God's voice, and I'll bring you a video about this and I'll talk to you from Job, even though you personally can hear God's voice. But there are also other ways God speaks to us, namely through his prophets. There are 6 prophets through whom God speaks. Now, how do we find them? I recommend that you look for them. Among Christians, not all Christians have these gifts, but there are Christians with these gifts, with the gift of prophecy. And they can be the ones, people through whom God speaks to us, people through whom God speaks to us. Now, you know, it's very hard, or we can't do other things compared to, or other ways for God to speak to us besides the ways that God has chosen to speak to us to people. So there are ways through which God speaks to us. Even if it seems impossible, even if it seems like something incredibly great, yes, God still speaks to us today because he is wonderful in everything he does. I thank you for listening to me, and I hope that you will also find God and put him to the test. You will see that God answers our requests and our everyday problems. Thank you for listening to me.